My vision was always singular. Some people are just scaffolding, meant to be kicked away once the real structure is built. The words echoed in the cavernous hall of the Tech Venture Summit, amplified and sanctified by $1,000 sound system. On stage, bathed in a single, brilliant white spotlight that erased all his flaws, Xavier looked like a prophet. The glare caught the silver in his designer glasses, making his eyes invisible. He was accepting the Innovator of the Year award for our project. For his project. From my seat in row 34, I watched the lie land on 1,000 captivated faces. I felt nothing, just a strange, cold clarity. He just kicked away the foundation. We met in a university library, hunched over the same obscure urban planning textbook. Xavier had the kind of restless energy that made you feel like the world was moving too slowly for him. Talked about creating self-sustaining cities, apps that could reroute waste streams, architectural software that breathed. I was the quiet one, the coder who could actually build the engines for his beautiful, impossible machines. We clicked. Our first good memory was a 3 a.m. breakthrough in his cramped apartment, sketching the initial framework for Verdun on a pizza box because we'd run out of whiteboard space. It felt like we were inventing the future. First red flag came a year later during a small presentation for a university grant. He introduced the project as his concept, with technical support from me. I remember the slight dissonance, the way the words didn't quite fit the reality of our shared late nights. But he was charming, a natural frontman. He squeezed my shoulder afterward and said, "You know how it is, they need a single face to believe in." I let it go. I believed in him, too. The next 2 years were a blur of creation. We poured our lives into Verdant. We worked out of a shared WeWork space in Brooklyn, fueled by lukewarm coffee and the adrenaline of progress. Used my inheritance, a little over $15,000, to pay for server space and advanced rendering software. Xavier handled the networking, the schmoozing. "This is your genius," he'd say, gesturing at my screen full of code. "Let me handle the boring handshakes." It felt like a fair division of labor. I was the talent, he was the suit. The cracks started as hairline fractures. He began taking investor meetings alone. I'd ask how they went, and he'd be vague. Promising, but they want more polish. He changed the passwords on our shared cloud storage, citing a security scare. I had to request access to my own files. Each time I rationalized it. He was protecting our work. He was streamlining the process. I was too busy building to see he was building walls. The discovery came not with a bang, but a whisper. An email, accidentally forwarded to me from a venture capital firm. It was a closing summary for their seed round investment. Recipient line was clear. Xavier Stone, sole founder. Attached was a capitalization table that listed my contribution as a freelance contractor fee, already paid. The document was dated 3 months prior. For 94 days, he had been sitting on 7 figures of funding while I was debating whether I could afford to upgrade our servers. I spent 2 weeks gathering evidence, a silent archaeologist digging through the ruins of our partnership. My nights were spent with Dr. Zellner, a data recovery specialist who, for a steep price, resurrected the lost files from our original shared drive. The signed 50-50 partnership agreement. Early emails where he called me the architect of the whole system. My GitHub commit logs told their own story. 8,347 commits from my account. 17 from his, all of them minor text changes on the website's landing page. The betrayal wasn't a single act. It was a sprawling, meticulously constructed world of lies. The breaking point was that night at the Tech Venture Summit. After he accepted his award, I found him in the lobby, surrounded by admirers. Our mutual friend Yasmin was there along with Trevor, a journalist from a major tech publication. Xavier saw me and his smile tightened. He pulled me aside, his voice a low, condescending purr. "Look, you were a great assistant, but let's be real. You write code. I create worlds. This project needed a visionary, not a plumber. Take the severance I offered and be grateful for the experience." His eyes were cold. It wasn't malice, it was dismissal. In that moment, watching him turn back to the journalist, I froze. The part of me that wanted to scream, that wanted to reason with him, simply went silent. The plan began to form, not as a thought, but as a certainty, and I noticed a tiny detail. On the massive screen behind the stage, his presentation slide still lingered. It showed the central architectural rendering of Verdant, our crown jewel, a design I had spent 4 sleepless months creating. Design he had just used to win an award based on a lie. My first call was to Ms. Wallace, an intellectual property lawyer whose name I got from a mentor. She was formidable, with eyes that seemed to miss nothing. She reviewed my evidence in her stark, minimalist office over the course of a 3-hour meeting. The cost was staggering, a $25,000 retainer just to begin, but the price of silence was higher. We spent the next 6 months in meticulous preparation. One afternoon, a courier delivered a thick envelope from Xavier's new lawyers. Inside was an NDA and a check for $50,000. It was a tempting offer, a clean break. I drafted an angry email, my fingers hovering over the send button. Ms. Wallace's advice over the phone was chillingly simple. Say nothing. Let him think you're scared. Our case was a fortress built of digital bricks. We had the time-stamped GitHub commits proving I wrote 85% of the core code. We had the recovered 50-50 partnership agreement. He had my personal bank statements showing the $15,000 transfer for server costs. We had text messages from over a year ago where Xavier himself had written, "I'm just the hype man, you're the real brains." And we had the killer proof, an ironic coincidence that felt like fate. Architectural rendering he displayed so proudly at the summit contained an invisible digital watermark, a string of code I had embedded in the metadata years ago, my initials and the exact date of creation. The decoy was our legal strategy. We didn't sue. We filed for a private arbitration hearing, as stipulated in the partnership agreement he thought he had deleted. He walked into that room believing it was a simple monetary dispute he could settle in silence. Arbitration took place in a sterile conference room on the 47th floor of a downtown skyscraper. It was just Xavier, his lawyer, Ms. Wallace, me, and the arbitrator. Xavier leaned back in his chair, the picture of bored confidence. Ms. Wallace began, her voice calm and level. "We are here to establish the true ownership and intellectual property rights of the Verdant project." Xavier's lawyer scoffed, pushing a folder across the table. "My client is prepared to offer a generous final settlement to resolve this baseless claim." Xavier's confidence began to evaporate as Ms. Wallace methodically presented the first wave of evidence. The partnership agreement, the bank statements, the text messages. His face shifted from bravado to confusion, then to a sickly pale shade of panic. He kept whispering to his lawyer, who was now shuffling through his own papers with growing urgency. Then came the final act. Ms. Wallace had the arbitrator project the image from the awards ceremony onto the room's large screen. "Do you recognize this rendering, Mr. Stone?" she asked. "Of course," he said, his voice thin. "It's the centerpiece of my design." Ms. Wallace nodded to the tech aide. "Please open the file's metadata." On the screen beneath the beautiful image, a small window popped up with lines of text. And there it was, my digital signature, my copyright notice. A creation date 2 years before Xavier had ever pitched a single investor. The room was silent. Xavier stared at the screen, his mouth slightly open. He looked from the screen to me, his eyes finally registering the depth of his miscalculation. "This is a trick," he sputtered, his voice cracking. "It's my vision," I finally spoke. "Can't build a world with stolen bricks." The aftermath was swift and total. The arbitrator's ruling came down within 48 hours. I was awarded 51% ownership and full creative control of Verdant, plus financial damages that clawed back a significant portion of his seed funding. Trevor, the journalist, published a damning exposé detailing the fraud. The Tech Venture Summit publicly rescinded Xavier's award. His VC backers pulled out and launched their own lawsuit against him. I saw him once more, not in person, but on LinkedIn a year later. His profile picture was a cheap, poorly lit headshot against a wrinkled gray backdrop. His title wasn't CEO or founder anymore. It was freelance strategy consultant. He had lost the company, the money, and the one thing he valued most, his story. He was no longer the visionary. He was a footnote. My renewal was quiet. I didn't move into a fancy corner office. I kept the small team I'd hired, and we moved back into a WeWork, a bigger space on a higher floor. The quiet focus of the work was its own reward. The peace was the real profit. Last month, I gave a talk to a group of design students at my old university. One of them asked me what it took to execute a singular vision. "A vision isn't singular," I told them, looking out at their faces. "It's a foundation, built with every person who believes in it. The structure is only as strong as the people you lift up with you." The scaffolding was never meant to be kicked away.